Picture a young woman waking alone on a curve of empty sand, sunlight already climbing over the water, and gulls crying somewhere overhead, and no sound of any human voice but her own. The night before, she had fallen asleep in the arms of the man she loved, certain of her future beside him. Now, opening her eyes and looking out across the water, she sees only a single white sail already shrinking toward the edge of the world. He is gone. Not lost, not delayed, but gone on purpose, leaving her on an island she has never seen before, with nothing beside her but the shape his body left behind in the cooling sand. This is the story of Ariadne, the Cretan princess who loved a hero named Theseus enough to betray her own father and her own kingdom to save his life, and who woke only days later to find that same hero had sailed on without her while she slept. Why would a man she had trusted with everything abandon her on a strange shore without a word of warning? And is betrayal really where her story ends, or is something else waiting for her on that island that no one, least of all Ariadne herself, could have expected? If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It truly helps this channel. And tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now settle in, and let's go back to Crete, where this story begins with a labyrinth, a monster, and a princess about to fall in love with a stranger. Ariadne was a princess of Crete, daughter of King Minos, a ruler whose island kingdom commanded the sea lanes of the Aegean and whose palace at Knossos was said to be the grandest ever built in the ancient world. Wealth and power surrounded her from birth, yet her family carried a shadow no amount of gold could hide. Through a strange curse laid on her mother by the god Poseidon, Ariadne had a half-brother unlike any other creature alive. The Minotaur, part man and part bull, kept hidden beneath the palace inside a maze of twisting passages built by the master craftsman Daedalus, so intricate that no one who wandered in ever found the way back out. That maze, the labyrinth, is its own story and belongs somewhere else. What matters here is what her father did with it. Every 9 years, as tribute for a war Athens had lost, 7 young men and 7 young women were shipped from that city to Crete and led into the labyrinth, left there for the Minotaur to find in the dark. Into this grim arrangement, one spring, a new group of Athenian tribute arrived at the harbor below the palace. 14 young strangers walking toward a fate none of them could escape. Watching from the palace walls as their ship came in, Ariadne noticed one of them immediately. A tall, calm figure who did not walk like a man walking toward his own death. His name, she would soon learn, was Theseus. Theseus, she learned, was the son of the king of Athens himself, and he had come to Crete by his own choice, folding himself in among the doomed tribute because he intended to do what no one before him had ever managed: kill the Minotaur and end the tribute for good. Ariadne could not stop thinking about it once she knew. She had spent her whole life in the shadow of her family's secret, watching ship after ship arrive, carrying young people who would never sail home again. And here, at last, stood someone determined to end it. Whether it was his courage that moved her, or simply the way he looked at her as an equal rather than a princess to be flattered, something in Ariadne shifted the moment she truly saw him standing among the frightened tribute. Slipping away from her father's guards at night, she sought him out in secret and offered him a bargain no one else in the palace could have made. She would help him survive the labyrinth and find his way out alive on one condition. He would take her with him when he sailed for Athens, away from Crete and her father's kingdom forever. Theseus agreed without a moment's hesitation. It must have seemed to Ariadne like a fair exchange, her kingdom's darkest secret, traded for nothing more than a single promise of love and a place beside him. For help, Ariadne turned to Daedalus, the very craftsman who had built the labyrinth and who alone understood its one great weakness. However twisted the passages seemed from the inside, a straight line could always lead back out again. Following his advice, she gave Theseus a simple ball of thread and told him to tie one end at the entrance, letting it unspool behind him as he walked deeper into the dark, so that whatever happened at the center of the maze, he would only need to follow the thread back toward the light. What happened inside the labyrinth belongs to another telling. What matters here is that Theseus walked in, and Theseus walked back out again, alive, the thread still wound around his hand, and the Minotaur left behind him in the dark passages forever. That same night, before her father could learn what his own daughter had done, Ariadne fled the palace at Knossos with Theseus and the surviving Athenian tribute, running down through moonlit streets to the harbor where his ship waited at anchor. Ropes were cut, oars dipped into black water, and Crete began to fall away behind them into the night. For the first time in her life, Ariadne left the only home she had ever known, betraying her father, her family, and her kingdom, all for the promise of a man she had known for only a handful of days. The journey from Crete carried them first to a small island called Naxos, a quiet place of pale limestone cliffs and pine-covered hills rising out of the wine-dark sea, where Theseus's ships put in one evening to let the exhausted travelers rest. Ariadne walked along the curve of the shore as the sun went down, worn thin by the terror of the escape and the sleepless nights that had come before it, the sand still warm beneath her feet and the sea folding and unfolding endlessly against the rocks nearby. Whatever words passed between her and Theseus that evening were never recorded by the old writers, but the sources agree on this much. She lay down to sleep on that beach, believing herself entirely safe, believing that the man she had given up everything for loved her exactly as she loved him, and that morning would bring nothing more dramatic than the next leg of their voyage toward a new life in Athens. Naxos, in the deepening dark, grew silent except for the sea and the wind moving softly through the pines above the cliffs, while overhead the stars came out one by one over a beach that would not stay peaceful for long. Somewhere out on the anchored ship, while Ariadne slept, Theseus was making a decision that she would not understand until it was already far too late to change. Ariadne woke to sunlight and silence. Sitting up on the sand, still half caught in sleep, she reached out of habit for Theseus beside her and found nothing but a cold, empty hollow pressed into the sand where he had lain the night before. She rose and turned toward the water, scanning the horizon the way a person searches an empty room for someone who has only just stepped out of it, certain for one more heartbeat that he must be somewhere nearby. Then she saw it, a single sail, small and white, already far out to sea, carrying Theseus and his ships toward Athens without her. She ran along the shoreline, calling his name into a wind that only carried the sound back to her own ears, waving at a ship too distant to notice, wading out into the shallows as though she might somehow close the gap between herself and a hero who was never turning back. No one has ever agreed on exactly why he left her there. Whether he simply forgot her amid the chaos of the voyage, whether he discovered he did not love her after all, or whether, as some of the old poets insisted, a god had come to him in a dream that very night and commanded him to sail on without her, for reasons entirely his own. What the sources do agree on is what came after. Ariadne alone on an unfamiliar shore, believing herself utterly forgotten, weeping until there seemed nothing left inside her to weep with. Certain that her story, the story of the girl who gave up everything and received nothing in return, had already reached its end. The island of Naxos, though, was not as empty as it looked. It was sacred ground, one of the favored haunts of Dionysus, god of wine and revelry and a wild, unpredictable joy, said to wander from island to island trailing satyrs and dancing followers in his wake. Drawn by the sound of a woman weeping alone on his shore, or perhaps simply by fate, Dionysus came upon Ariadne in the depth of her grief. Exhausted, salt-streaked, sitting among the rocks with the sea in front of her, and nothing at all behind her but an empty beach. What he found there was not a footnote to someone else's story. He found a woman who had defied a king, solved an unsolvable maze, and survived a morning that would have broken almost anyone else. And something in her, even at the very bottom of her sorrow, caught him completely. The old storytellers describe what followed almost like a sudden change in the weather. One moment, Ariadne sat alone with her grief on an empty shore, convinced she had been erased from every story that mattered, and the next, a god who could have commanded the devotion of the entire world knelt down quietly in the sand beside her instead, and did not leave. What grew between Ariadne and Dionysus in the days that followed was nothing like the frightened, hurried love she had once offered Theseus in the shadow of the labyrinth. Dionysus never asked her to give up her home for him, because by then she had none left to give. Instead, he offered her something no mortal suitor ever could: a place beside him that would never again depend on someone else's ship, someone else's memory, or someone else's choice to stay. The old writers say he married her properly, with every honor owed to the bride of a god, and that among his wedding gifts was a crown of gold, forged by Hephaestus himself and set with jewels said to glow faintly, even in darkness. A crown fit not for the daughter of an island king, but for the wife of an Olympian. Word of the marriage was said to have reached Olympus itself, where even Zeus, who rarely approved of anything, found nothing in Ariadne to object to. Ariadne, who had woken on that beach believing she had lost absolutely everything a person could lose, discovered instead that her story was only turning, not ending. The girl who had solved the unsolvable maze and been left behind for her trouble became, in the end, something far greater than a princess could ever have become on her own. When Ariadne's mortal life eventually came to its close, and the old sources are not entirely consistent about how that ending arrived, Dionysus could not bear to let her simply vanish into the dark the way Theseus had once let her slip out of his life without a word. He took the golden jeweled crown he had given her as a wedding gift and flung it up into the night sky, where the old poets say it caught among the stars and stayed there, its jewels becoming points of light arranged in a perfect circle. The constellation still known today as Corona Borealis, the northern crown. On a clear night, it can still be found low in the northern sky, a quiet ring of stars that most people walk beneath without ever learning its name or the story behind it. It would be easy to remember Ariadne only as a story about betrayal, and for one long, terrible morning on the shore of Naxos, that is exactly what her life had become. But betrayal was not where her story ended. She was found, grieving and entirely alone, by someone who saw her exactly as she was and chose her anyway, and the woman who once believed she had been erased from every story that mattered was given, in the end, a permanent place in the sky, shining long after the man who left her on that beach was forgotten by everyone but the storytellers. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.